Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, the National Shrine of St. Francis Xavier Cabrini in Chicago, the Cabrini Retreat Center and Displacement, and the Cabrini University and located in Radnor, Pennsylvania. I welcome a warm welcome to all of you who are joining us today for this special webinar. We appreciate your support of the sisters and our missions and are delighted that you could join us today. Today, more than ever, we need Mother Cabrini intercession to help the immigrants who are our brothers and sisters, and a lot of them depend on us. Our speaker today is Abel Rodriguez. Abel is the Director of Immigration and Assistant Professor of Religion at Cabrini University in Radnor, PA. His background is centered on migrants and justice. He is frequently called upon to give presentations on immigration and policies and criminal laws. Abel studied theology at Harvard University and has a Master of Arts in Latin American Studies at Stanford and a Bachelor of Arts in Spanish at Cabrini University. Please join me in welcoming Abel Rodriguez. Abel, please take over. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you all so much for inviting me to be part of this great speaker series. I appreciate it. Particular thanks to the Shrine and to the sisters for inviting me. So just give me one moment. There we go. Just to let everyone know that there will be another talk coming up in the series on March 24th. So I hope that you'll be able to join us for that as well. And with that, I will begin. Today, I'll talk a bit about challenges in migration, taking a bit of a global perspective. My particular expertise is on U.S. immigration law and policy, but I'll be looking a bit more broadly at some global migration trends. It's obviously impossible to discuss everything, and so this is just kind of major trends and things that are happening recently around the world. And then I'll also talk a bit about the Center on Immigration's work, the center which is housed at Cabrini University. And then I'll just give some suggestions for people who would like to get involved with these issues, work more with migrant communities, and how folks can take action. Okay. All right. So just to point out that obviously we are still working our way through this pandemic, and that the root causes of people needing to migrate, of forced displacement, they're not put on pause as much of the world is paused in certain ways. It can actually exacerbate or really kind of make worse, right, the circumstances that cause people to have to migrate and to be displaced from their homes. Right, migration has not been put on pause during this pandemic, obviously. And the reasons that people need to migrate have not been put on pause. And so I'll talk a little bit about that as I work through my slides. I have a lot of slides here. I'm going to work through them very quickly. I'm not necessarily going to go point by point. I'll just kind of talk over some of the slides and keep an eye on time and just speak accordingly and move accordingly through the slides since our time is a bit limited today. But in terms of looking at this on a global level, what we're seeing is that we have increasing numbers of people who need to migrate, right? We have increasing numbers of people who are displaced from their homes. And so you can see here on the slide that in 2005, it was 1 in 174 people in the world were displaced from their homes. Whereas in 2020, now it's 1 in 97, which is more than 1%, right? So what we see is an increasing number of people that for various reasons need to migrate or are displaced. So that means that currently there are about 80 million people who have been forcibly displaced from their homes. The lion's share, most people are displaced internally, but obviously we have people who are also displaced externally, right? In terms of needing to flee as refugees, seeking asylum in other countries, or being displaced, for other reasons. And so what that boils down to is about 37,000 people per day that are displaced. that means about 1,800 people per hour. So just in the time that we will spend together today, by the time we are finished with this event, 1,800 people will be displaced from their homes. And what we have is about 40.3 million people in modern day slavery. Most of those people are not identified. It's less than 1% of people that are identified as being in slave conditions. And we still have 4.2 million plus stateless people in the world, which is obviously problematic for people in terms of their rights, right? And having diminished rights by being stateless. Of course, we know that there are myriad reasons. There are many reasons that people migrate. And so causes of people being displaced are everything from trafficking to violence, gang-related violence, violence against women, human rights abuses, persecution of various forms, war, poverty. Climate change is becoming an increasing reason that people are migrating, right? We're seeing more and more climate migrants, right? Climate refugees, disasters, etc. And so what we're seeing is these are the highest levels in recorded history of people being displaced from their homes. And as a response to that, rather than, and I'll talk about both challenges and successes. We'll talk about some good policies that are taking place as well, right? And some good responses to people being in migration. But what we're also seeing is somewhat of a backlash or reaction to this increased migration and people really locking down borders. And we're seeing more and more people running, even at the highest levels of government, on kind of isolationism, cracking down on borders, reducing the number of immigrants to countries. We're seeing that increasingly. So we're seeing more migrants, and we're also seeing more pushback on migrants, right? And locking down of countries that people are attempting to migrate to. And so that's just the big picture, right? Of globally what's happening in terms of migration and people being displaced. And so what I'll do is I'll very briefly just talk about what's happening. Like I said, just kind of very broad strokes, major trends in different regions of the world. Okay. And so in terms of displacement, you can see here, these are the top 5 countries that experienced displacement in 2019. So on the left, you see this is people who were displaced because of conflict or violence, right? And so you can see the numbers there, and you can see the countries of origin of those people. And then on the right, you can see people displaced by disasters, and you can see the numbers and the countries there. So like I said, we won't go through line by line, but what you can see is that the regions that are particularly impacted here are Asia and Africa, right, primarily for these reasons. So you can see East, South, and West Asia represented here, and also some African countries as well. Although you also see the United States there, right, in terms of disasters. On the right, okay? All right, and so again, just major kind of broad trends in terms of African migration. We have seen increased migration, so it follows the trend of increased migration. We've seen a 176% increase of migration of Northern Africans to Italy and Spain, for instance, and that's both by land and sea. And we'll talk about this, that what's happening is we're seeing more and more people migrating by sea rather than by land, which can make things much more dangerous for people as well. 193% increase in arrivals from East Africa to Yemen. So we're seeing increased migration both from North Africa and from East Africa. And so in 2020, we had over 2,000 refugees and migrants die on the Atlantic route to the Canary Islands. And so this is a particularly dangerous route that people take. But what we see is that people are continuing to risk their lives for various reasons, right? In migrating, including in emigrating from African countries. Okay. Okay. And so what we see is on the African continent that the number of international migrants on the continent nearly doubled. But what we're seeing is that people are remaining within Africa who are migrating as well. They're migrating to other countries within the continent, but not necessarily leaving. So over half of Africans moving abroad remain in Africa. And then we've seen developments in terms of, for instance, the African Union. And so one of the pieces of the formation of this African Union and the development of it is kind of more kind of increased freer migration within Africa. And so they're moving towards a borderless Africa with seamless intracontinental migration. And so the idea is to really integrate and to develop together to have more free trade and more free migration within Africa. Okay, and so they're making it easier for people to obtain visas or obtain them kind of on the spot if people do relocate to other African countries. And so opening things up a bit in terms of both migration and in terms of free trade. Okay. And then what we see is that this is true really kind of globally, is that you can see here a visual representation of the reasons that people migrate. And so you can see the orange being the kind of most representative category here, and you can see that that's economic reasons. And so by far, the reason that people are relocating is primarily for economic reasons. And so really what we're talking about is that poverty and global inequality is really the major driver, right, of people migrating. And especially during the pandemic, as economies around the world are suffering, we see people continuing to migrate, including during the pandemic itself. In terms of migration in Asia, 40% of the world's international migrants are from Asia. That's about 111 million people. And so a lot of migration happening from Asia. The largest total numbers of migrants living abroad anywhere in the world are India and China, right? That's also true in the United States. For the past several years, in the top 5 countries that are representative of people, for instance, getting green cards, becoming permanent residents in the United States, India and China are consistently in that top 5. So a lot of folks coming from India and China to the United States. And in fact, proportionally, folks from Asia have actually surpassed folks coming from Latin America to the United States in terms of kind of visa migration, right, to the United States overall, okay? And so it's expected that in the coming years that the Asian population in the United States may surpass the Latinx population in the United States. Okay, top refugee origin countries in the world are Syria and Afghanistan. The largest corridor is from Syria to Turkey, right? Large migrations there, millions of people heading to Turkey from Syria. And then Myanmar, which is the 3rd in the region in terms of refugees, people leaving Myanmar. That's driven primarily by violence against the Rohingya people. We know that in April 2020, for instance, 70 migrants died after they were prohibited to disembark as they were attempting to flee Myanmar. Okay. And again, in terms of what is primarily driving migration from Asia, again, we saw that there are different reasons: disasters, violence, conflict. But really the primary driver, the largest numbers, and of course refugees who are fleeing for different reasons, persecution of different sorts. But the primary driver in terms of numbers is for economic reasons, right? A lot of these are quote unquote low skilled workers. That is not my terminology. That's a terminology that's used kind of technically, right, in the literature. Actually, a lot of these jobs require quite a bit of skill, but it's primarily a lot of low-skilled workers that are relocating for better opportunities, both employment and in terms of financial opportunities. Okay. And then Latin American migration. Again, there's a lot that we could say about each of these regions, each of these places, right? But then again, this is just kind of recent broad strokes trends. We've seen large emigration from Venezuela in recent years. So about 5.1 million people have emigrated due to the political and economic instability that's taking place there. And this is just a reminder, because often countries like the United States will say, well, we're taking on a lot of immigrants. It's a lot, right? It's important to remember that it's actually a lot of the surrounding countries, often developing countries, that actually absorb the most migrants, right? And so that's true of Venezuela. There are Venezuelans who are coming to the United States, but really it's Colombia primarily who has accepted in Venezuelan emigres, Peru, Chile, and then the United States. And you can see the percentages here, right? And actually just recently, this month, in February of 2021, Colombia gave legal status to 1.7 million. That's almost, it's the vast majority of Venezuelans who have migrated to Colombia have given legal status to 1.7 million Venezuelans, okay? And then we continue to see, we've seen that immigration from Central America has dropped. Some say as much as even 75% drop. but continues, and that continues because of gang and other violence in Central America that continues. The northern triangle of El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala have some of the highest murder rates in the world. They're consistently in the top 5, top 10 in terms of murder rates. And we could talk a lot about this, but that's, if you ask me, in large part due to instability that has continued after some of the civil wars that happened in Central America and some of the interventions of the United States in that region of the world as well. Okay. But that migration continues, and we continue to see people coming north from Central America. Okay, just keeping an eye on the time. All right. And then a broad overview of European immigration policies. We've seen an absence of sea rescues in the Mediterranean, particularly during the pandemic itself. And so the lack of rescue boats, countries refusing any rescued migrants, turning people back, right, as they migrate. Greece pushing people back at their borders. And they've been accused of pushing migrant boats into Turkish waters, for example, and the closure of traditional migrant routes by land and sea, and the militarization of borders. And so this is making people go into more dangerous routes in order to migrate, right? So we see this in Europe. We see people going into the water, into dangerous waters, right, in order to migrate, because they're essentially being pushed out into those areas. This is similar to policy in the United States, where barriers have been created and more enforcement has been put in place, which pushes people into more isolated areas in the desert, right? And so in our part of the world, it's primarily pushing people into the desert. In Europe, it's pushing people out into the water, right? Into more dangerous routes. Okay. So this is, as I mentioned, sea arrivals have increased dramatically during the pandemic because of land borders being shut down. And so we are seeing people, putting themselves at risk in order to migrate in this way. We have some positives as well. During the pandemic, for instance, Spain emptied its detention facilities. We know how dangerous it can be to keep people in detention during COVID times. And so they closed down. Portugal and Ireland both gave people access to things like unemployment, social welfare, healthcare, right, regardless of their status, to make sure that people were taken care of. And Italy introduced an amnesty law that gave 200,000 people work permits and legal residency. And so we do see some positive responses as well, right? Although we're obviously seeing a lot of challenges. Okay. So in terms of the United States, there's a lot that we could say here. Again, I'll keep it very brief. We didn't see any changes in the law recently, right? Our INA, Immigration and Nationality Act, the immigration laws have not changed. There hasn't been any changes made by Congress. We haven't seen any major surprises from the courts. Some changes that have been made have been upheld and some have not. DACA was upheld, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which is a form of protection for young immigrants. The Supreme Court did uphold that, and we were kind of holding our breath. We weren't sure exactly what would happen with that. But really what's been driving, there have been major changes in terms of immigration enforcement, and what's been happening in the United States. That's been driven really by the executive branch. So really the president, right? And his administration for the past 4 years has made major changes. We're talking about over 1,000 changes to immigration policy and how immigration policy is executed during the past 4 years. And so really what we saw is, just to be direct about it, is the executive using its power to its full potential to basically gut our immigration policies, right? And try to limit immigration as much as possible to the United States over the past 4 years, even pre-pandemic, right? So we saw things like travel bans, we saw major changes to our asylum laws, but also the way asylum policies are kind of executed. We saw the end of temporary protected status, or the attempt to end temporary protected status for many countries, changes to the process to become a US citizen. And so I put the website here in case the slides will be shared. What we can see is actually some law professors and their students actually kept track of all of the changes that happened under the previous administration. And so you can see here, you can go to this website and you can see that there were over 1,000. There were 1,064 changes that they tracked. There were 57 presidential orders, and there are currently 120 lawsuits related to these changes that took place. And so this is a fantastic website that really kind of documents all of these changes that have happened over the past 4 years, because there have been a lot of changes that have taken place. Okay, and so so I think folks are wondering and asking, okay, so then what's next? What's going to happen in the United States in terms of immigration policy? Because this was a major focus of the past administration, right? This was what they campaigned on, and this was a focus for the, throughout their administration, that they would make major changes and really reduce the number of immigrants who would be accepted to the country. And so the current administration has only been in place, a little over a month, right? So we're somewhat, trying to predict the future here. We don't know exactly what things will look like, but here's what's happening now and what we know. We know that the current administration has ordered comprehensive review of regulations. So they want to go back, in other words, and look at everything that the Trump administration did and reconsider those decisions. They're working on that, and they're already undoing some of what that administration did. I think they will probably undo the majority of what was done under the previous administration, but that will take time, right? The Remain in Mexico, what they call the Mexico Protection Protocols program, that remains in place. In other words, people who were coming to seek asylum in the United States were essentially being made to wait in Mexico, right? Even if they're not from that country. So Central Americans, in other words, we're essentially creating these like tent cities at the border in order to be able to apply for asylum in the United States. At the moment, that remains in place. It's a major problematic policy that was put in place before, and that still has not been undone. In terms of challenges, so I'll start here on the right, and then I'll come back and I want to talk a little bit about this immigration bill that's been proposed, just very, very briefly. I do think that we will still continue to see challenges. We will face challenges under the current administration. In the proposals that they've made, both in terms of campaigning and since they've taken office, they've not said anything about reducing detention or deportation. The United States detains about 400,000 people per year. These are immigration prisons. This country deports between 300,000 to 400,000 people per year. Those are families that are being separated, people who are being removed back to countries where they, in some instances, are harmed or even killed. And there's no real kind of promise that any of that will be reduced. We have 3 family detention centers in the country. So these are infants, children who are being, confined in detention centers. They've said nothing about ending that practice and those detention centers necessarily. And what we're seeing is in this immigration bill, they are talking about more border enforcement, right? That instead of talking about not pushing people into isolated areas of the desert where people lose their lives, more than 1 person per day dies in our deserts trying to cross into the United States. They talk about including more rescue beacons, right? Which is not the solution to that problem. And so there are going to be challenges, right? And this was our former vice president. We know that there were challenges then, right? Deportations increased, detention increased while he was vice president of the United States. We also know that when he was vice president, they made promises about passing immigration legislation, changing our immigration laws, and that did not happen. And so we need to keep an eye on this. He has made it more of a priority than the Obama administration did, or Obama did. But in terms of already proposing a bill, so he's showing that this is important to him, right? But we don't know at this point, what will happen. And so we did see, right, you can see here from 2008 to 2016, there was a continued increase in deportations, and telling people, right, the rhetoric, the message was that, well, we're deporting people who have committed crimes. The majority of people who were deported did not. And then the people who are classified as criminal, right, deportees, it's actually very low-level things that these folks are deported for, right? What we call regulatory offenses. So even things like traffic issues, traffic, right, violations, and very low-level kind of criminal offenses and that sort of thing. Okay. And what we saw is also an increase in spending while he was vice president of the United States. That has continued. So at this point, the United States spends $26 billion per year on immigration enforcement. That's billion with a B. And that's more than all federal agencies combined in terms of the FBI, DEA, Secret Service, U.S. Marshals, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. And so major, major spending in terms of, attempting to keep migrants out of the country. On the left here, in terms of the immigration bill, there are some very good things. If they're able to get this bill passed, there are some positives in terms of how it would impact our immigration system. I won't go through it point by point, but they really want to create a path to citizenship for our undocumented population, which is somewhere between 10 to 11 million people in the United States, that within 8 years, they could potentially become citizens of this country. They want to really work on our visa system, both in terms of our family visas, employment visas, and diversity visas. We have backlogs of people. Some people have to wait 25 plus years in order to come to this country to be reunited with their families. They want to clear out those backlogs, bring people to the United States, right, who qualify, clear out the backlogs for the employment visas, increase our diversity visas, which lets people come in from different parts of the world, increase that from 55,000 to 80,000 per year, ending this 3 and 10 year bar. Some people, when they step foot outside of the United States, they're barred for 3 or 10 years, depending on how long they were here. They want to end that. So there are some definite positives in this bill. This would be a major improvement to our immigration laws in the United States. But right now it's a proposed bill. We'll see what happens. Okay. All right. Also, $4 billion in foreign assistance to Central America was included in this bill in order to try to get at the root causes of, and stem the migration that's coming from Central America, allowing people to remain there, right? Okay. Okay, so with that, I will transition over to talk a bit about the Center on Immigration's work. So in the context of all of that, right, what is it that we're doing at the center? First I'll say we are a staff of 3. It's myself, I'm the director of the center. Professor Jennifer Bulcock is the assistant director of the center. We are both full-time faculty members at the university, and we work in the center. And then we have a half-time administrative assistant who works with us. Her name is Arely Salmonte. She's wonderful. And so it's the 3 of us who work together in the center. These are our areas of engagement: education and dialogue, advocacy and activism, research and scholarship. And so I'll just very briefly say a little bit about what we do in each of those areas. Okay. All right. So in terms of education and dialogue, we invite experts to come in and talk about different issues, depending on what's happening at that time in terms of migration. We hold symposia. And so we had a symposium on trauma and trafficking. We had another on what was happening on the US-Mexico border, and the root causes of why people are crossing the border. And then we're considering for the fall having a symposium on healthcare and migration. At the moment, we're hosting a book talk series. So we're having some authors come in and talk to us about their areas of expertise and what they've written about. And we invite individual speakers to come in also, depending on what's happening in the world. We host workshops. We give know your rights trainings to people. So if they encounter, immigration officials or the police, what their legal rights are in the United States when they encounter those people. And we do financial literacy trainings and also hold open forums when there are changes in the law and that sort of thing. We also offer courses at the university. I teach a course titled Immigration Law and Social Justice. I'm hoping soon to offer a course on sanctuary, the practice of sanctuary and the legal and religious dimensions of sanctuary practices. And our assistant director also offers a course on global ethics with a focus on migration. And we're looking at offering a certificate at the university, a certificate in migration studies for people who are interested in developing expertise in this area of migration. And then at the end of this semester, we'll host a faculty development on working with immigrant students and kind of best practices at universities, making campus welcoming, right? So we'll invite experts in to talk to us about that, okay? And we educate folks through our social media platforms as well. Our book talk series is happening now. If you'd like to join us, we still have talks on March 17th and April 14th. If you would like to join us for those talks, we host them virtually via Zoom, okay? In terms of our advocacy and activism, primarily what we're doing is kind of building community among our students, giving them some training on advocacy and on these issues, and then sending them forth, right? Facilitating opportunities for them to go and advocate on issues right now at the state and national level. And we're thinking about how can we do this kind of more internationally and focus on international issues as well. But we go with students, so you can see from the photos here, we have students in DC at the top. In the middle, it's students doing advocacy in Harrisburg, right, on state level issues in Pennsylvania. And then at the bottom, we have them at a vigil to close down a family detention center here in Pennsylvania. And on the right, marching in Washington, D.C. Related to DACA and DACA issues, and with some other folks from the Cabrini family from New York that we met up with in Washington, D.C. We do legal advocacy. I am an immigration attorney, and so I continue to do legal work on a part-time basis, on a limited basis, and continue to take on clients and represent them and do consultations and give legal advice. We also provide legal observation at marches and things like that, make sure people's rights are being protected. And like I said, and we take students to marches and things as well as they are interested in doing that. We also, as an academic center, also do research and scholarship. And so every semester we hold a colloquium where we invite people to share their research. And as a community of scholars, we help people kind of give them feedback with their research and help them develop their research. We present at conferences and also publish on immigration issues. And we publish really with an eye to influencing policy and trying to advocate for better policies in the United States and globally for migrant communities. So really it's about justice for our immigrant communities, right? Okay, and so a few ways that people can take action. There are lots of ways to take action, but these are just a few suggestions. One is it's not necessarily to reinvent the wheel. There are lots of organizations that are already doing excellent work. And so I would recommend connecting with them and seeing how you can support their work and be involved, either by doing or donating or both, right? I always say do and donate. So supporting them financially and also supporting their work. Volunteering at local nonprofits that are working with immigrant communities. Nonprofits are doing a lot of excellent work. For instance, some are doing accompaniment work, right? In terms of going to court with people, accompanying them while they're in detention, doing visitation, things like that. Supporting sanctuary families, right? There are churches, congregations that are taking people in who have not been granted asylum and are attempting to avoid deportation because they fear going back to their home country. So supporting those sorts of families. Some of what we do with our students, writing letters to elected officials, making phone calls, lobbying, showing up at their offices and talking with them about these issues and really advocating for more just policies for our immigrant communities. Going to marches, and really, like I said, a lot of this is driven, it's, economically driven. So combating global inequality, interventions in some of these countries, right, goes a long way towards ensuring people don't need to migrate in the first place or aren't displaced in the first place. Okay. And so just to end on a note of hope, so in the United States, I think people are feeling a bit more hopeful in terms of our immigration policies. But I think that just opens an opportunity. I don't think we can count on any administration to necessarily do the right thing or on their own, implement more just policies for our immigrant communities. We can't rely on that. Really, where I find hope is in us, in the people, right, who are doing who are doing advocacy. So for instance, my students, right, different organizations around the world who are working with immigrant communities and working on justice issues. They're the ones that give me hope that they'll hold these elected officials, right, these politicians, accountable, and that we will have more just policies for our immigrant communities. And also that they are taking action themselves, right, not relying on elected officials in order to serve immigrant communities and ensure that they, are able to attain justice, right? Okay. And so I know we'll take questions in a moment. Should I go ahead? Would you like me to do, so I do have a prayer to end with. Would you like me to do that at the very end, or should I do that now? Now?
Now would be great.
Okay, great. So what I chose, the prayer that I chose to end with, this is a prayer card that was created by Clinic, the Catholic Legal Immigration Network in Washington, D.C. They reached out to us at the university because they wanted to create a prayer card and asked if we could provide a prayer. And so we had a prayer that, a Cabrini University student who is a dreamer. So one of our students who's an immigrant herself created this prayer, and so I will read it. I know your microphones aren't on, but even though we can't hear you, if you'd like to read it with me, I'll just kind of read through it slowly, and I'd welcome you to read it with me. Okay. Mother Cabrini, patron of immigrants, who came to help those like me, who abandoned everything we knew. We left country, family, and friends to find a safer place. You embraced the freedom of America, and I embrace it now. Sometimes I'm afraid, anxious, and overwhelmed. I may be criticized, ridiculed, and misunderstood because I look, speak, and act differently. Yet your love for all, especially the poor and the refugee, is my guiding light. It gives me hope. And I offer the prayer now that you so boldly prayed then. Dear God, fortify me with the grace of your Holy Spirit and give your peace to my soul. Amen.
Thank you.
Abel, thank you so much. And I think Nick is now going to help facilitate the question section. I saw there was one question in the question section. And again, you can also raise your hand, and we'll take about 5 to 10 minutes for questions. And then those that would like to stay will move into the Cabrini conversation. I'll paste that link again in the chat function. Thank you again.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Abel, for a very informative and really engaging and powerful presentation on this topic. And I took a copious amount of notes here, and there were a few questions that came in. And as you answer some of these questions or receive some of the positive feedback that came in during your talk, anyone who's here is welcome to add questions to the Q&A. I think I saw a couple come into the chat, but I'm going to start with the one that was posted in the Q&A, and this is coming from Juris Doctor at Cabrini. He says, do you think DREAM Act 2021 will be included in the supplemental appropriations bill? Your guess on comprehensive immigration reform coming to the floor? Question mark. I think Jerry was just kind of unloading his mind here. Have meeting with Senator Casey Abe this afternoon along with Network Catholic Social Justice Lobby colleagues.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'm optimistic, but very cautiously optimistic. Like I said, under the Obama administration, we know Biden was his vice president. They made big promises about immigration reform, the DREAM Act, doing something for dreamers. They instead used their political capital for healthcare reform, which is incredibly important, but did not then shift after that to ensure that we had comprehensive immigration reform or really put their weight behind the DREAM Act to support young immigrants. And so I'm cautiously optimistic because we got our hopes up then, right? In the first term of the Obama administration, and saw that they just didn't, they didn't use their political capital. They didn't, they really just didn't make it happen, right? And we didn't have any immigration reform under the Obama administration. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I do think there's a stronger chance now. There is a bill that's been proposed. This is very early in his first term. I do think that's a signal that this is a priority for him, that he would like to see this happen. I do think it would, yeah, I mean, I think it has a shot, and he's prioritizing it in a way that's even beyond what we saw, you know, under Obama. And so I'm hopeful, but cautiously optimistic here. Yeah.
Thank you. I think you answered this one question that came through the Q&A during your talk, that the slides can be made available after the webinar. And of course, the presentation will be posted on the website of the National Shrine of St. Francis Xavier Cabrini in Chicago. Another question that came through asked how many students are enrolled at Cabrini among immigrants. I think, you know, do we keep account of that at the university, or can you speak to the immigrant community that is enrolled at Cabrini?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can't give an official number. I actually don't know if we, as far as I know, I'm not sure that we keep kind of statistics in that way. At least I don't have access to them.
Right.
I can certainly tell you anecdotally that we have a sizable population of immigrant students at the university. And that's simply based on students who have come to us for guidance on different things, and also students who have come to us who want to get involved, want to advocate, want to be involved in the work that we're doing, and you know, and tell us that it's because they themselves are immigrants to this country, or their parents are, and so I wouldn't be able to give you numbers or percentages or anything like that, but I would be able to say that that we do have a significant immigrant community on our campus, and it's very vibrant and very active, and is active on these issues, and that cares very deeply about these issues and justice for our immigrant communities.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I can affirm the work that you're doing, you and Jen, and in the center and in the courses that I teach, to have the students who have worked with you or learned from you in that space really enrich the conversation. In my Catholic Social Thought and Practice class right now, we're talking about immigration, and it's great to have some of the students there who are informed in this way. And one of the topics that we're talking about right now that's so central to Catholic social teaching is the role of the family, and how important it is to, and how the advocates within the Catholic community who are really protest against this the separation of families and the aim to reunify families. And so I really appreciate how the work that you're doing in the center dovetails with other parts of the mission at the school. I was curious. Yeah, sorry. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the African Union model that you talked about at the beginning, and maybe some of the work that was what you highlighted too, what was happening in Ireland, in terms of, those seem like very generous and more open approaches to this question. I don't know if I have a specific question. It just seems like they're moving in the direction of trying to create space and opportunity for people who are on the move.
Yes. And so two things. Well, one, thank you for that. Yeah, and also just in terms of family separation, there's often, so there was this, people were outraged about children being separated from their parents at the border, which they absolutely should be, right? That was happening. But then we often forget that even just deportations, right? Hundreds of thousands of people being deported, that's family separation also. And yet it doesn't receive the same, reaction, response. And so to not forget that's family separation too, right? That's happening as well, and continues to happen. But in terms of some of these policies that are taking place, I think we can learn from some of these other countries. They're certainly in other regions. They're certainly not perfect, and we see that there's this ebb and flow depending on what's happening. When there's an increased number of migrants going to a certain region, we'll often see that then there's a bit of a pullback and more restrictionist policies will be put in place. But overall, I think we can learn a lot from Africa and from Europe in terms of opening these spaces of freer migration. Because like the Schengen zone, right? In Europe, this African Union that's developing, and this freer migration that's happening there. And that really what we see is that there are great benefits that come from that, right? What we see is that when there's freer migration, when there's freer movement, it really benefits those parts of the world, right? It benefits obviously the people who are able to move more freely for opportunities and for work and for resources, but also the economies in those places also benefit. Because as people are able to move where there are jobs and there are opportunities, right? Those economies benefit from having workers, available in order to fill those, those needs. And so I think we can learn a lot that by that having more just policies for people in migration, that it's not only moral and right thing to do, but it's actually beneficial in some very practical ways that people who that might not resonate with, can also recognize.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. And looking at both of those sides of it too is important. It's a both and. It's a win-win. It can be a win-win proposition. So I realize that we're coming up on 11:45, and I know Sister Bridget wants to lead us into the other conversation that I know Nancy was trying to post a link for. So Sister Bridget, let me just.
In the chat
Oh,
room?
I think we already, well, we
already.
did the questions and answers in the webinar, but when this is over, and then I'm going to hand it back to Sister Bridget. I've tried to post the meeting link in the chat function. I'm having a little bit of difficulty because the length of the link. So you may need to, recreate it as a hyperlink in order to get into that informal meeting. But I want to thank everyone, and then I'm going to hand it back over to Sister Bridget.
Abel, Dr. Abel, a warm and deep thanks for your talents and your inspiration during this wonderful presentation. I hope we all learn to do something for our brothers and sisters immigrants. It was very insightful to me, and I'm sure that our sisters will appreciate that, and as well as our Cabrinian family. A warm and deep thank you so much. And we are looking forward to our next webinar, which is March 24th, the same time. So God bless you all. And thanks for all those of you who support our missions and support us. In the name of the sisters and all the staff and all those who helped to put this webinar together, I am very deeply grateful. Thank you so, so very much.
And again, I saw there's still a couple of questions in the Q&A. If you join us for the after party, perhaps